Welcome to MOE Conversations, the final one for 2021. I'm DK Ronston, very happy to be joining the Minister of Education, Dr. Nian Gadsby-Dolly. Now, Minister, even before we start the conversation looking at 2021 as it pertains to the education sector, I just want to ask, how are you?
I am at the end of the year, a busy year, looking forward to a little downtime because it's been challenging and it will continue to be challenging. So that's where I am now.
All right, so happy that you're getting a little downtime. But second year in the pandemic, end of term one, what's some of the work that's been done to reopen schools in different ways, as it were?
Yeah. So let me just recap just very quickly. Schools were closed in March 2020. And so between that time and now, we've had school mainly for secondary school students in snippets. So in August of 2020, the primary school students, they would have tried to bring them back out before SEA, but that was not very successful, and so we had to send them home. And in February of 2021, we did bring out our Forms 4 to 6 students. So they came out from February straight down until exams in July. And in term 1 of 2021-22, which would be September of 2021, we had students out again from Forms 4 to 6. And these, of course, are our students doing CXC exams. They have practicals and so on. So it's been difficult for our teachers, for our students, for our parents, because you don't have a regular school schedule. And that in itself brings some difficulty with it, some challenges, because you have teachers straddling students who are at school, some who are not at school, parents straddling school schedules, because it's no longer you drop your child to school every day and like clockwork. So you have to now navigate which days students are coming to school because of the social distancing. All of the students can't be accommodated at the same time. And of course, for teachers and students themselves, who are the ones in the hot seats, if you would say that, it's been a learning curve coming from normal, regular physical school and then to online school and then to a mixture of online and physical school. So all along the way it's been difficult and it's been challenging. And then of course at this ministry level, the staff, the administrative staff, those who supervise schools in the curriculum division, in the school supervision division, that has also been a work in progress, getting things sorted out to monitor, put things in place, our student support services division. So every aspect of the ministry has been on this learning curve, and we continue to be, and that's how it's really been since March 2020.
And in terms of that work in progress, if you are in a building, it requires certain types of maintenance.
Yeah.
If you're not in a building, it requires certain types of maintenance. So in terms of repairing schools, maintenance, and possibly even commissioning new schools, what has that been like for 2021?
So in 2020, when I started, I would have met a couple of schools, about 13 schools in progress. We have been able to complete just about 9 of those schools. The others are very close to completion. And so we would have commissioned them between September and October of 2021. We would have commissioned those schools. Now, those school is out and students are not at school and school is happening virtually. The plant still needs to be taken care of. So, of course, we would prioritize. It's a matter of prioritization. We have over 600 schools. Many of them, over maybe 80% of them, are over 50 years old. So if you just imagine your home, and imagine how many little things can go wrong every single day. Multiply that on the scale of a school, which is a larger compound, which is not necessarily receiving the kind of care you would give to your own home. And of course, children who generally would, not take that kind of care. So school infrastructure and maintenance is a huge project that is an ongoing project. So even though in March 2020 schools were not physically happening, repairs to schools went on since then. We've completed maybe over 300 projects, as well as the commissionings, and that continues. It's ongoing.
Further speaking to challenges, what are some of the challenges that have raised their heads looking at being able to balance or manage physical and online learning?
Yeah, there have been quite a few, and there continue to be. So let me start with the fundamental. The attendance register is a physical thing. Everybody knows you go to class and you get your roll call. So when you speak now to online school, that most fundamental thing is already different. And so it's been a work in progress getting an online way for getting the attendance, which of course is critical because we know that in the circumstances of COVID, we have children who had many difficulties being online, from devices to connectivity to simple supervision. There are some students with all of the connectivity, all the devices, but there's no supervision at home. So all of that went into the mix, and therefore it's important to keep a record of who's at school, who's not at school. So that most fundamental difference, that's one of the things. Of course, another big issue would be the ability of teachers to teach online. And so from March 2020 to now, we've had training ongoing. And I can tell you that teachers have been very receptive. We've had, they've overwhelmed the system every single time we put training out because it's really a work in progress to make sure they can deliver. And then, of course, for students and the support for students, we have our Student Support Services Division, which deals with the mental health aspect and the guidance aspect for our students. And what we had to do, of course, is to train them to deliver online, because with that transition, a lot of students needed that support and it wasn't available in person as usual. So that training to deliver even those services online. And then, of course, the whole issue of our parents who are now very much involved in the classroom and their ability to supervise their children, their ability to relate with the teachers and so on. That also had some work. So we did have some training courses through our teacher training division targeted at parents as well and students to be able to help everyone to make that transition. So it is still a work in progress, but those are some of our main challenges. And then, of course, with the hybrid learning, bringing students back out, and just the mental shift alone, DK, is a lot for parents because this is a time where fear is a big thing. And, you know, even parents just making a decision to vaccinate their children, that's another challenge. Parents making a decision to send their children out to school in a time of a pandemic. All of those are the very real and valid challenges that we are facing. Even teachers who may be fearful to come out to school, teachers who have children at home and are straddling their teaching duties as well. All of these things go into what are the challenges of the education sector, not just locally, but globally, and what we see as the things that we have to deal with every day, even as we ensure that the basics, teaching and learning, take place.
And I think sometimes when you think of teaching, when you think of learning, education, there may be a tendency to focus a little more on the children, not remembering that teachers are persons, they have their own challenges that they're dealing with. You spoke about the fact that every time a course was offered, it was oversubscribed. But what kind of feedback were you getting in terms of helping teachers ease into that transition, as well as having those parents engage with the teachers a little more towards the learning for their children?
The teachers are very, very, by and large, in general, the teachers are very much in tune with moving towards the blended learning. Of course, and I wouldn't just say age, because we have older teachers who are very much in tune with technology, and then you have even some younger teachers who may not be so. So I wouldn't say age, but some teachers, of course, you would always have a degree of persons who are, you know, not as easy to jump on to the new trend. And so that's a constant challenge. We have some teachers, even with all of the training offered, who may not have availed themselves of the opportunity at this point in time. We have some teachers who feel very uncomfortable in the synchronous classroom. That's where you have your Zoom and so on. So you have that mix going on. But by and large, you know, they take to doing that. And we also had a lot of parents reaching out and taking advantage as well. So, you know, you get that mix and that challenge is there, but by and large, you know, they're taking advantage of it.
And hopefully, coming out of this experience, teachers are much more valued. Because I think sometimes, like you spoke about, is no longer just a case of, okay, dropping off your children every day, Monday to Friday, and saying, okay, well, they'll be taken care of, I come and get them after, as opposed to having to have a more hands-on approach to their learning, being able to supervise a little more. So I may not understand the subject totally, but I know this is what you're supposed to be doing at this point in time. And that level of engagement brings me to the question of consultation, because a lot of consultation would have happened. What was the main focus of that consultation that was done?
Main focus would be health and safety, and followed very closely, almost in a tie, by teaching and learning quality. right? Of course, when the issue of coming back to physical school would have arisen, health and safety would kind of take precedence there. And where we're dealing with online school, then it's issue of quality and equity even, because when we have students who don't have devices, don't have connectivity, students who don't have supervision, then you're speaking about equity and the opportunity they have to learn as well as everyone else. And then, of course, when you speak to coming out to school, is my child safe? Is the environment safe? And you get a lot of that. So those are the two main issues that we deal with in consultation. And I can tell you, all of the stakeholders, principals associations, denominational boards, tutor, which would represent the teachers, all have been very vocal, been very real about what their challenges are and how the ministry could best approach these challenges to help in this circumstance.
And that is a lovely segue into the question, because it's one thing to say, okay, well, we're having consultation, but it's another thing to say, okay, well, this is the information that we got, and these are some of the concrete steps that we are going to use going forward.
Yeah.
So what would some of those steps be in terms of things that would have been proffered by the stakeholders?
So one of the main things would have been the Education District Health Unit, which has been set up since January 2021. What the stakeholders would have expressed is that in some cases there was difficulty liaising with Ministry of Health officials to be able to get information, to be able to get testing and so on. And so that would have come out of the stakeholders consultation, and so they have been up and running. And what they do, it's not a nurse for every school. It's a unit that offers advice, offers training in some instances with the staff and so on, and is a liaison between the Ministry of Education, schools, and the Ministry of Health. So, for example, when we have cases that we have to get tested, they would help us to expedite the results and so on. They would offer, as I said, training to principals and staff about how to deal with a COVID situation, because even though we've given out the guidelines and we've been very explicit, and that's another stakeholder recommendation, how explicit we have to be about what happens when a COVID positive case or a contact is discovered at a school. Because, of course, in a pandemic where we have hundreds of persons being infected every day, you would imagine that in this last term, we would have had positive cases in our schools. And so to avoid the panic of, oh my God, there's COVID in the school, a reasoned approach to these are the guidelines, this is how you enact it, let's go through kind of, what you call it, when you do a test, and that's what the health unit has been doing as well, helping them to go through the paces so they understand what to do very clearly as a principal, because it's not if a case will happen in the school, it's when a case will happen in the school.
It's like simulations.
It's right. So, so they go through that with them and so on. So that unit came out of that consultation. Again, the guidelines, the clarity of the guidelines, that's another thing that the stakeholders are very clear about. They want to be certain things to be very clear. In the case of tutor, sometimes they may ask for a circular to be sent out from the ministry, which is even a little stronger than a guideline, because it says this is what you are to do. It's almost an instruction to a principal. And there are certain things that they have asked for to be circularized in terms of how teachers are to progress throughout this splendid time. So a lot of that would have come out from stakeholders. Stakeholders would have also asked for certain things to happen in terms of return to school. So, for example, we are looking at bringing students back out in January. Stakeholders would already have been consulted, and they would have given their comments as to what they think would be the best way to do that, how they would want to proceed, flexibility for principals to be able to make their schedules within certain principles set up by the ministry. All of that would have come out of stakeholder consultation and would be reflected in the operation of schools at this time.
Where does early childhood education play into this?
Yeah.
Because being able to have forms 4 to 6, that should be one level of understanding.
Yeah.
Primary school, getting ready for SEA, that should be another level of understanding. But that people just starting their educational journey, where do they fit in? Because to me personally, it feels as though they may be missing out the most in terms of, as opposed to just learning loss, but just social engagement. Where do they fit in from the eyes of the ministry?
And that is the thing. We would really have hoped to bring out our ECCE students and our early primary students a lot earlier than now. But our circumstances have not allowed for that. So in February of 2021, we brought out forms 4 to 6. And the plan was in April to bring out standard 5. And so we would have rolled from there. unfortunately in April we were not able to bring out standard 5 based on our infection levels. And so we are still at the point where the students who are coming out are those who have exams before them. So it's the imperatives, and they have practicals that they must come out for. So in January of 2021, you would have heard the Prime Minister speak to the fact that the UN has said, you know, we are seeing rising cases in the region, we are seeing rising cases worldwide. The last things to close should be the schools. And so they have been offered guidance, the CDC has offered guidance on how to manage the schools in this particular circumstance. And so having 4 to 6 out, and then looking very closely at bringing standard 5 out, I can say that is something we hope to do before SEA, and also looking at what happens in term 3, which will be April of 2021. We would sincerely hope that by that time we can bring out our ECCE. Because, I mean, parents have been clamoring, but you can understand when fear comes in and sets into a country, persons find it much more palatable to have older children come out. When you consider the small children, even though the information worldwide is that the small children do not have very severe attacks of COVID-19, we have had deaths. And so that instills a certain level of fear in our parents. So though we understand the importance of our ECCE, they don't have an imperative in terms of an exam. And so that's why they have been further back on the burner, not off the stove, but further back on the burner, because we have been trying to move with sensitivity for our population. Trinidad and Tobago is a very special, unique place. And even though we see things, a lot of things happening worldwide, we have to contextualize it. Our culture is different. And we just have not had, at this point, though we have persons saying, yes, bring out ECCE, we have not had that overwhelming thrust from our stakeholders, especially for our lower levels to come out at this time, especially since they can't get vaccinated. So.
And I guess the last thing you want would be to have a movement that seems as though it was not necessarily high-handed, but we didn't want this.
Yeah.
So it's something so that hands can hold hands to work together.
Yeah, it's a balance. It's a balance, because we have to, as a government, make decisions that may not be necessarily popular with everyone, but that would suit the needs of the country, as well as take into account what our stakeholders are saying. So you have different stakeholders and they have different points of view. So you have to try to strike a middle ground where you have to deal with your governance responsibility for the country and take into account the wider stakeholder view and try to get everyone in there, you know, just as much as you can.
And in terms of having everyone on the stove, even though some people might be a little closer to the burner than others, looking at the holistic engagement of all stakeholders towards the education and development of people within the education system, and looking at the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. But with that in mind, though, there's been a thrust for community involvement by the ministry. What are some of those things, those concrete steps that you all have taken towards this end?
Well, of course, I think the most successful and famous one would be our Doctor School initiative, where we asked our corporate sector to come in and assist us, knowing that in September 2020, we are heading to online school. We thought we would have physical school then. The numbers didn't allow for that. And so the quickest way to get any device into the hand of a child, and of course we said, you know, no child left behind means no child left offline. And the quickest way was to ask for help. At this point, you know, these are our children. This is what we need. And corporate Trinidad and Tobago responded overwhelmingly. Over 22,000 devices donated, and directly to the schools, into the hands of students. And that, I think, showed our students, showed our country that we are not alone. It you know, gave truth to the fact that this is a village, and Trinidad and Tobago is our village. And so we were really happy to be able to embrace that. But of course, devices would be just the thin end of the wedge, because we recognize that our most successful schools, and I say successful in terms of student performance only, which does not give a full idea of success, but I'm using that. Our most successful schools would be the ones where you have that village. You have a very strong alumni association, you have a strong PTA association. And so it brings with it a certain generational type of approach to ensuring that my little brothers and sisters are taken care of as much as I can. And so for our schools that don't have that already established the Adopt a School, and we are in talks with some of our business associations now to further that relationship between the business community and our schools, so that Adopt a School goes further than just devices. There are other things that we need, other support that we need, training, all of that we need. And I must say that some of our chambers did reach out to us, and so we are in talks with them now to deepen that relationship, because it is critical. It is critical for our schools to, and for our students to understand that they are not alone. Somebody is interested in their welfare.
And it's really something to appreciate when, as opposed to saying, okay, well, this is just corporate social responsibility, and looking at the fact that, okay, this school is in my area, people talk about fence line communities, and it looks good. I think it's more than just the optics, saying, okay, well, people actually want people to do well.
And there are models, because there are quite a few organizations that do impact on a consistent basis for their fence line communities and their fence line schools. So there are models that show this type of engagement, and so we hope to capitalize on those.
But as opposed to just the Adopt a School program, the ministry itself made a commitment to supply some devices. What's the status of that? What does that look like?
So we procured 20,000 devices, and I guess at our last check we may be in a couple hundreds, which we usually keep for if we have any issues, if you have to replace any, and so on. So we have distributed basically all of those devices to our students. Certainly in September 2021 we'd have gotten a new intake, and so those students would not have been counted in the first batch of students who we would have assisted. So we did put out, and we have distributed those government procured devices via means test. So it's a little different from the Adopt a School, where corporate Trinidad and Tobago, they gave directly to the schools. For the government procured devices, we went out and we said, okay, who needs a device? We got that information through the means test. We would have processed those and given out to those who were successful. So we did another issue of the means test in October. And so we have that information now so that we can procure more devices, because what we realize is that with a new intake every year, what you're looking at is capital expenditure that would be, you have to do every year to make sure we have vulnerable students secured. We also procured 10,000 MiFi devices, and those have also been distributed. In that case, we gave to also teachers, and even with the government procured devices, we did supply our teachers as well who would have needed devices. So it's between our students and our teachers, both laptops as well as MiFi devices to assist with connectivity, because of course some teachers are at home, some are in school, and they require service. In terms of Wi-Fi infrastructure at the schools, we have been working with TAT, and they have been helping us with 54 of our rural primary schools, because of course in some of those areas connectivity itself, the infrastructure is not well built out. So the ISPs have been collaborating with TAT to help those 54 schools. 27 are complete, and we have 27 ongoing now. And through the ministry itself, we have procured the services of a contractor to supply or to broaden our Wi-Fi services in the school compounds, the secondary school compounds, all of the schools in Trinidad. So we are working with that now to be able to do that. We have a March 2022 end date for that project, so that we expect that in our secondary schools, throughout the school, you'd have more Wi-Fi. Most of them had Wi-Fi in the office, maybe in the library, maybe in an IT lab. But we need it now to broaden to the classrooms, because the teachers may be in the classrooms using devices as well as the students. So those are the kinds of projects we are working on from the government side, and also with the input of our corporate friends, part of our village.
Definitely building out that infrastructure, because I'm glad you raised the point, because having devices is one thing, but having devices without connectivity is a totally different thing. And sometimes even the rate or the bandwidth that individuals like teachers may have at home, and they realize is not doing enough. It's no longer serving them for their personal needs. The fact that they would want it for longer, they need a better quality system to move forward and building out the infrastructure, not just possibly within their homes, but in the community.
And even as simple as in a school, a typical school, because persons would not have been using devices, the number of outlets in a classroom will be very minimal. But now if we're considering students having to bring their devices to school, and because we are also we have approval from Cabinet to move to ebooks. We sent out the RFP, so we are at the point now where we're going to go to Cabinet and ask for approval to supply ebooks. And if we are in that circumstance, and we're also building out our learning management system at the schools for nationwide, it means that students will be expected to come to school with their devices. We have to also move on e-testing, which is something that CXC has been doing for years. And so we now have to gradually get ourselves more into that mode. It means that students will be using devices more, because if you have to do e-testing for CXC, it means that you have to be very proficient. That has to be part of your usual e-testing schedule at the end of a term. So even down to the number of devices that can be used in a classroom because of the number of outlets for charging and so on, even that has to be looked at. And we've done a survey, so we're now costing out what that looks like to upgrade the electrical infrastructure at the schools. So it goes as deep as that.
And moving back from the schools a little further into the community, there is LMSIP in
Yes.
Lavender. What is that about?
Lavender Mover School Improvement Project. That project was started, I think, in 2018 into 19, and it is a project that focuses really at its core on student achievement and equity. Lavender and those schools in Lavender, what we would notice is that the achievement levels of the students are not exactly where you'd want it to be. And therefore, it is a project that it's almost like a pilot that looks at how you can infuse a school and a school environment to be able to increase the performance of students. So that project, as I said, it would have run from 2018 to 19, I think, and we are now on a second iteration of that project, looking at particular schools. We have 4 schools in mind, because the pandemic has made things a little bit more difficult, but looking at those schools and infusing the support of the community in generating that village-type approach to our student achievement. So there are a couple projects taking place, an agricultural project, and Ministry of Agriculture is partnering with us, the 4-H Club, which is centering on allowing our students to get that hands-on experience in the school, and it has mushroomed to the community. You have the parents involved, you have the community police involved, Hearts and Mind involved, NGOs who work in the area, coming in to, create these gardens with children. It's more than the garden. It's actually allowing our students to see schools as a place where they can do more than just learn. It becomes a little more real to them. It opens up entrepreneurial opportunities for them. And of course, you can do the teaching through the science, because they do agricultural science at school. And so it brings you into that sphere, and also allows the teachers and the students a better rapport. And that's critical, because in cases where you have students who may have difficult family lives and issues like that, it's critical for them to trust their teachers to the extent that the teachers can influence what they do and how they do it and so on. And it allows the teachers to get a better idea of what they're facing as well, interact with the parents. So that's happening. A drama, component is also going to take place, and dance and drama, because we know Lavender is a huge place for culture, and so we want to tap into that and what that brings, of course, to children as well. And so tutoring is also a part of that. So there's after-school tutoring going on online for now with our students, and so we have tutors who are there interacting with them. And this project is spearheaded by Minister Maurice Julian, and so she is really working with all of the NGOs, and of course the Community Recovery Committee. They are also a part of this initiative, because they are looking into Lavender as well. So you want to ensure we have all synergies. So that is what's happening in the Lavender Mover School Improvement Project, and it has been kicked off in term 1. And so we look forward to what's happening in term 2 and 3 as we meet our targets, which really is based in increasing our student performance, decreasing absenteeism, and increasing the support, the mental support for our students.
I really love the fact that you started that explanation by citing or using the word achievement, because I think one of the things that the pandemic has really kind of flipped on its head is what achievement means, what competence means, what education means. So this kind of inactive learning, where people are more holistic and they're looking and saying, okay, well, this is something that I can do in a space and a time when so many people have had to pivot, and things that were held in regard that wasn't that high, they've started to increase. So in terms of, it's now fashionable to grow a lot more of
Yeah.
your food.
And we've had a lot of focus on the environment for this year. I mean, that whole conference and what emanated from it, that was a big part of it. And so this whole thrust towards agriculture and our environment and understanding our environment and how we cohabit this world with the other things that live here, I think that is one of the main advantages that will come out as well from this type of program. So.
And in terms of those types of programs and building them into something that is on a policy level,
Yeah.
the education policy, how do we treat with that at this point in time?
So enabling student success is a part, one of our 8 pillars. And what we are doing right now, so in 2020, we had a consultation and we would have gotten a lot of responses from the public. So in 2021, we have just kicked off phase 1 of our public consultation, which now narrows into the policy and exactly what we want to do. So we have identified 8 areas, and this first phase of the policy has been closed to our stakeholders, our main stakeholders, our national boards, our principals associations, tutor, our education advisory committee, which has just been set up and so on. So we have narrowed that to that group, and we've said to them, okay, these are our 8 areas. These are the things that we think we need to focus on. Give us your thoughts and your comments. So coming out of that consultation, which took place between the 1st and maybe the 17th of December, a document will now come out, and that document, which would have had the benefit of all of our stakeholder input, that is now to be shared with the public. And of course, our stakeholders have another opportunity to input as they see fit. And that now is going to the public. So this is different from 2020. Because in 2020, we said, what do you think? In 2021, we said, this is what we intend to do. Give us your specific thoughts on these things. And there's a lot in there for the public to ruminate on and to give us their advice, because as you would have mentioned, it's a holding hand process. It's a let us do this together process, not the Ministry of Education is doing this. We can't do it alone. We have to have the buy-in. And it may not be what everybody agrees with in 100%, but everyone should be able to see themselves in that, and they should be able to resonate on the different levels of need. So that's where we are now. So we head into January. From mid-January, our document should be out and the public should be able to access that on our website and so on. Of course, everything is virtual because we're not doing anything face-to-face because of the situation. And the public will have the opportunity to give specific comments on the recommendations that we intend to put forward for policy 2022 to 27.
And I really appreciate that, because sometimes it's a matter of, okay, well, we've gone to you once. These are the things that you've given us, and we have crafted something, and this is what we're moving with. Versus, okay, well, this is where we are now. Yeah. So it's almost like a bespoke arrangement. So this is what we've crafted out of the consultations that we've had. Did we get it as right as we could have? What's your intake?
Yeah.
And so even having that close group of stakeholders being able to come back and say, okay, well, I didn't necessarily mean this. I meant it a little more like that. So being able to make those tweaks so that it's best suited for purpose.
Yeah, and I mean, the policy is a living, breathing document. Even though it's given for a time, built in there, and very important, would be the key performance indicators and the monitoring strategies, so that we're sure that we're proceeding along the line we want to go. And if there's anything, of course, that doesn't gel with exactly our outcomes, how we tweak that to be able to move forward. Because, I mean, face it, with COVID, it teaches us that we can never predict the future anymore, as much as we thought we would have. And so where there are fundamental changes to be made, we want to be able to have that space to say, what, this circumstance has changed, we need to also pivot, change. And so that's the approach we're taking, because we can't take anything for granted anymore.
And so pivot is one of the words that we've been using. It's now trending. A term that you've been using is learning loss. So in terms of dealing with learning loss, what are some of those things that are coming to mind? And do you look at that word a little differently now versus at the start of the pandemic as it pertained with your tenure to education?
Learning loss is a phenomenon that takes place even in a normal vacation time. So it has completely different connotations now, because it's not vacation, but we still have learning loss taking place, because our students are transitioning to learning in online environments. Not easy for everyone. Adults have problems with that, so far less for children who are more, tactile, who really depend on a large extent on socialization to carry them, and on their teacher influence. We learn so much from the unofficial curriculum, how to sit, how to speak, how to comport yourselves in normal conversation in a class. A teacher might use an example, that's out of the classroom, but gives you that kind of wider, broader education. It's a lot different now. And so that learning loss is not just in the academics, it's also, in so many different spheres of what comes to children through schooling. And so we've done, for the academic part, we've done some diagnostics this term, and the reports have been sent out to schools, and it's very specific, and our curriculum department is ready to be applauded for the hard work on that. Very specific to the different levels, and we would have sent out the diagnostics to be done in the classrooms. Teachers would have cooperated, done it, and so we have sent out now the report showing them this is what the scores were like, and these are the ways that you can now make up where you have gaps with your students. And they've even done a vision for parents. So we've sent it to the schools, and we've asked schools now to speak to their parents and explain to them, in language that they can understand, less technical language and the teachers may be able to use, but explain to them how they too can make up with their children. Because what's happening when children are not outside, they're not playing any sport, they're not doing the things that they're accustomed doing. And in teaching, one of your most valuable assets is drawing from the concrete and then go into the abstract. So you can tell a child, have you made fudge before? And if you're making fudge, and you can relate that, and that's an example I always use, to crystallization, which is a subject in chemistry. So the crystallization is abstract, but a lot of children might have made fudge. And now, our experiences with children are different. They are not outside anymore. So the things that you would have been able to draw on, you can't draw on those things again. So parents now need to be able to really structure the activities that they engage their children in to be able to help the teacher when they are teaching in the classroom. Because if the children have no experiences at all, very difficult to relate concepts and so to them. So that was sent out at the end of the term so that teachers can use that moving forward to, one, adapt their curriculum, because in some cases they can't cover all that they would have covered before because there simply are too many gaps. And so that is, that's a reality. We're facing it, and we are assisting our teachers to really deal with it in the way that is most meaningful.
And you spoke to it already, but I want to ask you again to elaborate on it a little bit in terms of the support division. And I don't know if I've given the ministry work, but helping teachers and helping parents address those gaps a little bit, possibly get a little more tools in the toolkit. What is the significance of that division, and how is it that people can engage with the division to get that sort of help if they think it's necessary?
Yeah. So the Student Support Services Division was set up to be able to meet that gap between learning and socialization, because we have students who their whole social atmosphere at home prevents them from learning in the best way. They need help to be able to make the transition between their home environment and the school environment in a positive way that allows them to learn. So you have school social workers who would deal with the more critical aspects of social issues at home and so on. They would be the ones that would make home visits to the parents, and they would assist in that way. And then you have your guidance counselors who look at a little more broad picture at career development, student advancement, and so on. So between them, they work together. And then you have your special education instructors who, where students have particular issues with learning, they would be the ones that would assist the teachers in developing the method to teach those particular students and so on. You have developmental specialists, you have psychologists and so on. So that unit is very critical, because in some students you have to prepare the base for learning. And so they do that. And in this time it's been a very busy time for them, because you have more students reaching out with other issues, where school and home could have been separated and students could have come to school to escape maybe what's happening at home. That's no longer possible for our students. So a lot of students are dealing with difficulty at home and no longer any separation. So that's been some of the issues that our student support services have to deal with. And also with parents and teachers, even though teachers have the employment assistance program, the employee assistance program, they have that available. But even so, the student support services has been reaching out, because there needs to be this kind of bridge between what's happening in the classroom and our teachers and our parents. So they have been reaching out again to teachers as well as the parents to assist, and this is available to students through, they can refer themselves by asking a teacher, or a teacher may refer them, or a principal may refer if a teacher speaks to a principal. So there are different ways that they can refer, and if a parent is also seeing difficulty, they can refer to student support as well. So there are different avenues of how a student gets referred to social services, student support services, sorry, and based on the circumstances, there are different things that can be done to assist the student, whether it's special education, if a student has to be assessed for, say, a learning disability or so, or if it's absenteeism, it might be a social problem at the home. So a school social worker may step in there. If it is a student who really doesn't have a social issue, but, needs some kind of grounding, some kind of guidance, they're confused about what's happening, they're kind of dispirited, maybe a guidance counselor can help in that circumstance. So it's really a suite of services that are available through parent, student, or teacher referral, or even the principal, to assist our students and now our teachers and even our parents to put themselves in a space where they can learn easily.
And this even highlights once again the importance of teachers to help bridge that gap and provide that safe space, because there's a anecdotal experience of one teacher actually having to talk to a guardian, asking them to turn down the music because the child in their care is in a learning environment at this point in time. So please allow them the best opportunity to do so.
There are students who just don't live in a circumstance that allows for that. They just don't live in an area that allows for them to be separate in a nice quiet space without any distractions. There are students who simply do not have that available to them. And even if in the home the parent may be trying, sometimes you have a home with multiple families and you can't always predict what would happen. You have neighbors sometimes who are the ones that would offend, and you can't control these things, which is why it's so frustrating for some persons, and this time has just been difficult.
And from your vantage point, what does year 2 at the helm of education in Trinidad and Tobago look like for you? What are you looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to getting our students out of school. And I say that clearly and without any apology, understanding from my vantage point the difficulties that our students, who are primary stakeholders, are facing. This is literally future of Trinidad and Tobago. Literally. I mean, my son entered Form 1 and I say almost he's now magically in Form 3. And it feels that way. And if it feels that way for me, I could well imagine for other parents how it feels. And some of the experiences I would have hoped he would have in secondary school, he just has not had. And as difficult and as fearful as parents may feel, and I fully understand that. I have a daughter who's also in lower 6, so she has been out of physical school in this term. So I understand what that fear looks like. I understand the trepidation. And I understand that not everyone is the same and will not deal with it in the same way. But I also understand that we have a responsibility as a government to prepare our children to take over the leadership of this country. And I am certain that at this point in time, it is not happening in the best way it can. We are doing the best we can in these circumstances, but if we look globally, we understand that the world is moving on. We must move on with it. Now, all of that is, of course, predicated on what happens in our health situation. We see Omicron on the horizon. We don't know what else will happen. But as it is, there are some steps that we have to take in this country to get our students back out to school. And once nothing deters us further, then that is what we will be setting out to do.
And I want to circle back a little bit in terms of managing, mitigating cases of COVID-19 in schools, and even the relationship that the Ministry of Education has with the Ministry of Health, looking at the fact something like the way that schools are zoned may be a little different from the way that the Ministry of Health looks at zones. So how has that interaction been going?
It's been going, I think, a lot better since we've established a unit, because now we have persons who are straddling both education and health, and so they understand the concerns on both sides. So I think it's a little bit easier, because when we didn't have that, we had the education persons and we had the health persons. So the communication is a lot easier, and our district health nurses, headed by Dr. Solomon, they have been in contact in the counties, reaching out on the county level, because as you know, health is a little bit autonomous in that way, where the county medical officers, they have some autonomy within their counties, and so you may have variances depending on the county and so on. So our unit has been liaising, has been working out the strategies so that we have, clarity again, that comes from the stakeholders. We have clarity on what's happening, and it's consistent across the districts, because we have districts, health has counties, so we want to make sure that there's no crack where anything can slip through. Because even as the Ministry of Education, we are, really trying to get our students back out to school. What is paramount is their health. So we're not going to sacrifice their health for that. And so that collaboration has to be even deeper. Our understanding of the procedures has to be even clearer as we move forward, because we want to ensure that our schools feel safe, our students feel safe, our teachers feel safe, and that when there's any issue at all, we can deal with it as we have been doing in Term 1. We can deal with it decisively, and it can be very clear about how things are to go, and they don't get out of control. So that really is our emphasis. And so as much as we want to get our students out of school, that is how much harder we are going to ensure that the work between us and the Ministry of Health, we're going in tandem so that we have no major issues in our schools. We don't want anybody to be unsafe at our schools.
And you spoke of things working towards things not slipping through the cracks. Yeah. We're about to close the conversation, but before we do, is there anything that I didn't ask overtly that you just want to put out there? Because I don't want it to slip through the cracks of this conversation.
I just want to maybe reassure parents, DK, that the Ministry of Education is certainly not going to put their children at risk at all. That's certainly not what we're going to do. And as a government, we are working together, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, so that we make the best decisions for our children. Because we are also, Minister Maurice Jordan has more than I. She probably has about 4 at school. We are also a part of this. So when we say that we are all in it together, it is literally that. And so we are going to do all we can to take care of our children, both their academic progress as well as their health. And so as we work together with our stakeholders, which represent our parents, which represent our teachers, represent our denominational boards and so on, as we work together, it will be always with the best interests of our country in mind. And we really look forward to our children having a better educational experience in 2022 than we had in 2021, with God's blessings.
And with that, we want to thank you so much, Minister, for making the time, and as well as thanking Minister Maurice Julian for putting in the work as well as all stakeholders. And we want to thank you. This has been the final MOE Conversations for 2021. I'm DK Rasta. Thank you for joining us.